I think I'm ready to start. Hi, my name is Assaf. I'm a professor from Texas State, and I have been working in rural South Africa since about 2012, particularly working with one very small community. And within the last 7 years, have developed and conducted a great deal of research within this small community. And so today what I'd like to share with you is some pedagogical practices that I have used and are supported by research. And so let's just jump in and get started. Whoop, this thing is sensitive, isn't it? Okay, how do I go back?
It's here. You go back here.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is this the joy of being the moderator? I have no slides.
Going back.
There we go. All right, you just saw my whole presentation. I'm finished. Yeah. Okay. I want to say too that what I'm sharing today is all these are ideas that are embedded in these language philosophies and themes, right? So you may not, it's not in my presentation because I'm sharing practices, but it's not void of the language issues that we're here because of our primary grade students. I want to talk about these 3 themes that kind of oversee the work I've done. The first one is a spiral inquiry-based curriculum. Building on Bruner's idea of a spiral curriculum is that we come back to these concepts, that we're constantly revisiting them. And they have to appear in the curriculum as well as the practices of the teachers who are teaching. And within this spiral curriculum, we're looking at inquiry-based instruction. So inquiry-based instruction takes the focus away from teachers and puts the focus on students. So it's a student-based inquiry-based theme. We also are looking at this idea of deep scaffolding. So we've heard about scaffolding, we all know what that is, but deep scaffolding really touches upon 4 areas. It talks about language scaffolding, meaning scaffolding, structure scaffolding, and then child scaffolding, building upon their own life experiences and connections, right? So really important. And then this idea of layered, complex, multimodal text. So we've heard about text complexity, right? And helping our students go from easier to more difficult academic texts. Well, my work has really looked at that notion, but the fact that our students need to have multimodalities as they're reading and writing, both because it supports language instruction, but also because it's part of our everyday world. So I'm going to talk about these embedded themes throughout my presentation. Okay, wrong way. Wrong way.
That's backwards, so this is forward. So this is forward.
This is forward.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah. There we go.
Ta-da! All right, so 3 areas that I'm going to talk about: inquiry-based learning, multimodal text, and play. Oh, gosh, I'm so sorry, but I'm not sure what's happening. There we go. Potential outcomes. So in terms of why would we even think about these 3 areas? First of all, we want to have motivated and engaged learners. And so it's this notion of engagement that is super important, right? We want to have more reading volume because as they progress through the middle grades into secondary, they have to have more exposure. And with more exposure to reading comes more access to language. There's higher level thinking, so students are analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating information. We have a deep comprehension and purposeful language learning. In my presentation and the work I've done, we've completely integrated reading and writing. They do not sit alone. And so when you have an inquiry-based teaching practice, you'll see how that works. Within this complexity of text, we're looking at more academic vocabulary. And then we have this idea of rehearsal. So along with that spiral curriculum, I'm going to talk about how play provides rehearsal, practice, and mastery of language. All right, let's see if I got this. right. All right. So inquiry is more than just asking questions. And I could probably give a 3-hour presentation on what inquiry is. But just for today, I think what's very helpful to think about is we start with questions, but we want our students to then find answers that they can apply that knowledge to something useful and important, right? So they do go through a cycle of investigating, exploring information, producing or publishing that information, and then reflecting on that next process. Always in this attempt to convert information to useful knowledge. All right. So what we want to do, and what I've done with my students in South Africa, is we've started with the known. And I'm not sure you can see that. Yeah, I guess you can see it there. We start with, what do they know about their family? What do they know about their community? What do they know about school? And then we want to take that known and have them generate questions and begin to create knowledge of the unknown, right? So generate and add to their funds of knowledge, as well as use reading, writing, thinking, listening in that process of doing so. I want to share with you 3 examples. This first example was a project that we used with students called Career Dreams. And we brought together students and we asked them to think about what do you hope to do? What do you hope to be in the future? Now, while this isn't new, we ask students all the time, the process and what they were engaged in was quite new for them, right? So giving them ownership. What do you want to do when you grow up? Who do you see yourself? Having them generate questions. And then creating graphic organizers like a KWL chart to help them document what do you know about different careers? What do you want to know about different careers? And then searching for those answers. And for this project, we searched for answers by interviewing community members. We went online. We watched YouTube videos about the day in the life of careers. So we were delving into multimodal texts, which I'll talk about in a second. Okay, go back. Another project that we did was a community history project. So we started by asking students, what part of your community is important to you? Students started by creating maps. They identified topics or areas. We then provided different artifacts that help them discuss and talk about. So kind of this first text of different aspects of the community. And through discussion and note-taking, they began to think about, I'm really interested in education. I'm really interested in this school. I'm really interested in the churches in my community. And it's particularly in a very small township. And so then from there, they started to interview community members. They were taking notes. They were using cell phones to collect data, analyzing those interviews, and then creating a digital story, which then became a website around this idea of who is our, what is our community and what are we interested in. And 2 other examples, and I have more, I just picked these out to explore our identities. So we asked the students, what do you believe in, right? So we then provided pictures of different social issues around their community and asked them to create a graphic organizer, brainstorming graphic organizer, where we asked them, what do you notice? What are you interested in? Why? Why are you passionate about that? And then creating digital stories around this is what I believe in and why. Poems for Your 2 Voices was also a focus on the students' identities, thinking about who they are, what they believe in, what they value, and how they're similar and different from their peers. So then we had a Poem for Your 2 Voices, where the students created digital stories. So in sum, an inquiry-based learning practice is typically thematic, right? And sometimes those themes come from teachers, other times they come from the students based on their interest or the curriculum as well. It is a spiral curriculum, so we're revisiting these topics as we're going through, asking questions, searching for text, writing down that information. It's collaborative. So we are engaging others, right? And creating those small groups to work together. So it's the social nature of learning. It's a constant integration of reading and writing. It's intentional scaffolding. So teachers aren't just saying, oh, here's the information, right? We're teaching strategies embedded within this process. We're teaching strategies how to read a text that might be difficult, how to think about what you know and don't know, and all those other metacognitive strategies. And again, it's process and product focused. So we want them to go through this process of asking questions and seeking information, but we also want to have an outcome that's real, that's authentic. All right, the next topic that I'm going to talk about is multimodal text. We know multimodal systems and ways in which language learners process and take in language, but multimodal texts are literary and informational texts that represent different levels of complexity, right? So we're not just saying anything, we're saying the complexity level is different, meaning the layer, and each text provides scaffolding for meaning, language, and structure. So some examples, and I could have put a whole more up here, is multiple print and digital texts from diverse medias, diverse formats, and lengths. So layered in complexity to support meaning, structure, language, the background knowledge of the student, the motivation, interest, and the demands of the language task. And oftentimes I think that in the past we choose texts that are complex without understanding who our learners are, without understanding the language task at hand. And so one of the things that I'm really suggesting here is that this can never sit alone without the knowledge of our students and their needs. Some examples. And I did include game boards because I think there are texts out there that we sometimes disqualify, right? But they are excellent informational texts that provide a great deal of information and interaction. Back. So this notion of text complexity is very important. And one of the things that we want students and teachers to understand is how these texts build from one to another. Text complexity, as I mentioned before, is this idea of starting from background knowledge, so scaffolding meaning, and then language structure, as well as content area. So text can also be a gradual release of responsibility, right? So when we layer these texts of support for students, we are creating this gradual release of responsibility. So as the way you read this is as the teachers introduce and model strategies to read text and they demonstrate strategies, they're slowly giving students less support, and the students are taking more responsibility for their own reading. So as an example, this came from This I Believe unit, and I want to highlight some of the texts that we used. We started with a video of South Africa's Got Talent, and it was a young woman doing spoken word poetry. And we really just started by showing this to the students and asking them questions. What does this girl believe in? And we watched this video about 4 times, right? And each time we would stop it, we would have a discussion. Students would be taking notes. And then we would go on to the next photo. Now, this took place over many weeks. It wasn't a day. The next text was looking at photos of their community, things like their school, their church, trash on the ground, streets. etc. And then asking them to think about what do they notice about these images. So this notion of visual representation and reading images is super important. We went from there to a podcast where we listened to a This I Believe essay, which was fairly short. And then we brought in the transcript and read the transcript with the students as they listened to the audio. We took the audio away. And as we're reading this, we're also comprehending, right? We're writing on the text. We're talking about what we notice, so that deep comprehension. We go on to text 4, which was the transcript, and then we move on to this next application of now what do you believe in? So using a multimodal text like a graphic organizer to get them to begin to brainstorm their beliefs and their passions. Finally, we introduced sentence frames as a beginning to get them writing, right, to give them the academic structure of that language. So the aim is not to classify a text as simple or complex, but to determine what it is that readers need to know and to be successful with a text. So multimodal text can also be anchors of support. So for example, I have foldables here. And this is this idea that it's multimodal, it's tactile, right? So we can take language and structure out of the text we're using and create multimodal anchor text like foldables. Typically, the students create these foldables. Other examples, let's see, are interactive word walls, where we have like an alphabet word where we're brainstorming words, but also very interactive here where we have physical artifacts on our word wall where students are going up and actually interacting and using the word wall. We have an interactive writer's notebook, which again builds on this idea that learners are learning through multiple modes, so we want to create spaces for them to do so. And then finally, sentence frames. So the intentional uses of multimodal text do 5 things. They build necessary knowledge. They make content accessible. They make language accessible. They mentor academic structure, so they serve as mentors. As students are reading, they're actually learning from these texts. And they're lowering that affective filter, right? As we layer them, we start easy and go more difficult. All right, so I'm going to speed through some of this last portion of my presentation, which talks about play. And play is extremely important in terms of our spiral curriculum in that it reinforces new skills. It provides time to rehearse and practice. And it creates this zone of proximal development, but with peers. So we know as our upper primary grade students, we know their life experiences. They're most likely going home and supporting siblings, right? But we often do not create those opportunities in school for them to help one another. So play has many modes, and it's different at this age, right? It's definitely connected to text and to literacy. So things like readers' theater or poetry slams or word games, board games, physical games, or word sorts. So some of the pictures I have here are a board game or even a Words Their Way game and word sorts. So a word sort, if you're familiar with this, is when students they're given words that they've had access to, they've read over before in different informational texts or different literary texts. We take those words out, we ask them to look very carefully at those words and to sort them according to prefix, suffix, beginning sounds, ending sounds. It's pretty unlimited what you can do with a word sort, but it's a playful game. It's not a test, right? And it's a way for kids to socialize together, to talk about and negotiate where those words go. So I don't know how I'm going to play this. I have just a very fast word sort video just to give you a quick, how do I do that? Anyone?
There you go.
Okay. There you go. Okay. finally, reiterating what Patience said, teacher education is essential. That's my business, right? I'm a teacher educator. I believe in educating and building capacity, right? There are no quick fixes. What we're proposing here is very challenging, and it's something that demands that teachers know content pedagogy, and they have to know their students. Right? So in this spiral inquiry-based curriculum, we need to teach teachers this process of continued language and literacy learning, right? It is a process, and it takes a lot of understanding how children develop. They need to know how to facilitate inquiry, very different from a teacher-focused instruction, right? How do we ask questions? How do we get students to be more engaged? And the way I've done this in my own work is to engage pre-service teachers and in-service teachers, to have them experience what it's like, to go through these projects together, and then reflect on what that experience is. Deep scaffolding, they need to understand how to support meaning, language, and structure, right? All those intricacies that go along with that deep scaffolding. Again, the layered, complex, multimodal text, so they need to understand the qualitative way in which we look at text complexity, the quantitative, right, so the lexiles and the word counts, and then they also need to understand their students. So how do I match this with kids? And then finally, play. I think this is, again, letting go. It's that same belief that as a teacher, my job isn't to control, it's to create and facilitate learning. And so how do I create that space for play that is meaningful and connected to the curriculum? And that's it. Thank you.